Before presenting the RNR model, I want to say a little bit about what led to RNR. How did we get there? And it goes back a number of years. And it starts with a large review of the treatment literature by Doug Lipton, Robert Martinson, and Judith Wilkes. And this review was done at the request of New York State Corrections. New York State Corrections was ready to embark on a revamping of their prison system to make it more rehabilitative. And they wanted to know what kind of programs would be the most appropriate to institute into their prisons. So Martinson, Lipton, and Wilkes did a review. It was published in book form in 1975. But before then, a year earlier, Martinson published a summary of their work in the Journal of Public Interest. And this was one of his conclusions, right? There's little reason to hope that we have found a sure way of reducing recidivism through rehabilitation, right? Half of the programs that they reviewed did reduce recidivism, but Martinson concludes there's no sure way of doing this through rehabilitation. And what's interesting about Martinson's report in 1974 is that he offered an alternative. And there you have it, deterrence, or get tough. Now, the Nothing Works movement, the Get Tough movement, was huge in many countries. And the United States in particular embraced it. I'm not going to read all the bullets in that slide, but you can see how America has such a large incarceration rate. More money is spent to incarcerate than on education. And let's bring it down to the personal level, right? The human cost. Of course, we deny liberty to people, putting them into prisons. When they come out, they have difficulty finding employment. And sometimes you even have, many times, personal degradation of the individual, the person. Now, it can be argued that maybe it's all worth it, you know, if it truly deters offenders, those in conflict with the law, to reoffend, then maybe it is worth it. And what we need to do, though, is look at the evidence. And there have been two large reviews of the literature. So here we are, 20 years apart. These are meta-analytic summaries, and both reviews conclude that if anything, custodial sanctions are criminogenic. Right? Our Get Tough approach actually increases recidivism. So the conclusion, and I think today most people would agree, that is that deterrence does not work. The question we now pose is, why doesn't it work? You know, at a very basic level, we think it's common sense that if you hurt someone when they do something that you don't like, they'll stop doing it. but it doesn't appear, at least in the criminal justice system. So why doesn't it work? Now, the answer, to get that answer, I turned to my undergraduate professor many, many years ago. I don't want you to be fooled. My dear professor here is much smarter than he looks. He taught me and thousands of psychologists lessons about the effectiveness of punishment. And actually, because I was an undergraduate in the early 1970s, undergraduate psychology students actually did have their own pigeons and their own rats to experiment on. But coming back to punishment, these experiments taught us a lot about when punishment works under what circumstances. So, what are those lessons? There is a huge literature on the psychology of punishment. And this is what we know. Punishment can only inhibit or suppress behavior. There is no way on earth you can teach any new behaviors through punishment. The only behavior, and I don't know, I use the term loosely, the only behavior is freezing, learned helplessness, not doing anything. But if you want to suppress behavior and you want to use punishment to do it, what do you need to do? What do you need to keep in mind? Well, it has to be immediate. It has to come right after the behavior that you want to suppress. Now, as I go through this list, I would like you to consider our criminal justice system, right? Does our courts, our police, do they give out punishment immediately after the behavior? Appropriate intensity. It has to be just right. Too little has small effects, if any. It's like water rolling off a duck's back. If you punish too severely, you get all kinds of problems. Not only do you not suppress some behaviors, but you may actually increase it. I used to work in a maximum security detention center, and many, many times I've heard an inmate returning from court after being sentenced complaining about how severe the judge was on him, that it wasn't fair, and just livid with anger. Right? So you have to get it just right. In the laboratory, you can set your gauges and electrical meters to the right intensity. But in the real world, it's difficult. The other important consideration is that punishment works best for certain kinds of people. Right? You look at those characteristics. Who does that characterize? It's probably the kind of person who has not yet left this webinar. Right? Is this your typical description of one who has been in trouble with the law? Not at all. So now we have lots of evidence that deterrence, getting tough, does not work. We know why it doesn't work. So it appears we're back to square one.